All right. Good morning and welcome. Good morning. My name is Isaac. I am a lead historian here at the Edison and Ford Winter Estates. And today we are talking about the Ballad of Burton Willard. We're going to be talking about Thomas Edison's firstborn son. Let me share my screen real quick. Today we're talking about Burton Willard, otherwise known as Thomas Alva Edison Jr. And we're going to talk about you might call it the tragic tale, but his life of ups and downs and mostly downs. Um, and so we're going to start with his childhood. So he was Thomas Edison's firstborn son. He was born January 10th, 1876. He was the second child of Thomas Edison and Mary Stillwell Edison. He had an older sister named Marion. Now, being born to the gifted inventor and businessman that Thomas Edison is and was both a blessing and a curse. And as through this presentation, you'll see he was burdened with his own name, Thomas Alva Edison Jr. This is a young picture of young Tom. For most of the presentation, I refer to Tom as Thomas Edison Jr. as either Tom or Tom Jr. Many times I refer to his father as Thomas Edison or just Edison, but hopefully I try not to be confusing with it. So, Mother Mary, Mary Stillwell. So Tom was one of three children born to Mary. Mary was a New Jersey girl that Thomas Edison would meet when he was 24 years old. She was 16. She was working at a subsidiary of his, and they would meet. And in 1871, they would get married. They had a daughter and two sons, as I mentioned, Marion Estelle Edison, Thomas Alva Edison Jr., and William Leslie Edison. You'll notice Marion and Thomas have nicknames, Dot and Dash. A lot of Thomas Edison's life, he worked in the telegraph business, working with Morse code. And so his first two children, he named them respectively after dots and dashes. And he would refer to them that in letters and other things. As you can see, Marion was born February 18th, 1873. Tom was born 1876, and their younger brother was born 1878. Now, unfortunately, Tom Jr. Did not have a lot of time spent with his father in his childhood, as this early years coincided directly with Thomas Edison's transition to becoming a full-time inventor. 1876, when Tom Jr. was born, that was the same year that Edison had essentially established Menlo Park as his home and laboratory, and that is when he officially started operations at Menlo Park, his invention factory, trying to make an invention. And that was where his father's focus was, not in parenting. And so ultimately, the caregiving of his children would go to their mother, Mary, and other family members. Alice Stillwell, Mary's sister, would move in and act somewhat as a caregiver and a nanny. Margaret Stillwell Gramack, that is Mary's mother. Mary's parents lived 12 miles away, so her mother, Margaret, and Nicholas, her father, were very much caregivers, babysitters, watching over the young Edison children. And there was a lot of lab staff that worked and lived on the property. Um, there was a boarding house that Thomas Edison's relative owned, and so they had staff that were regularly here. Mary called them the boys, and Mary's sister Alice would actually go on to marry William Holzer, the glass blower, for Thomas Edison, and I'm going to talk about him later on. So, um, this is a lovely photo of Thomas Edison, a large amount of workers around him. Right behind him, there's a man next to the left door there with a beard, white hair. That is Thomas Edison's father. Samuel Ogden Edison Jr. Uh, just to point out some figures to the left of Thomas, our left, his right. There's a man with a beard and a hat. I know that doesn't specify it, but the one sitting immediately, next to Thomas Edison and with his daughter between them, that's Charles Batchelor, Thomas's right-hand man, and the guy with the mustache under him, that is William Holzer, according to my research. So the gentleman I just mentioned, the glassblower. And you see Marian Edison leaning against her father's shoulder, not too excited about this photo being taken, but not nearly as maybe moving as young Tom Jr., standing between his father's legs, being held in place by his father, who's not looking entirely too happy. And you can see that Tom's face is physically morphed because he is moving his head as the photo is taken. Now, this is in front of the laboratory, I believe. Um, according to actually not even according, Thomas Jr. And a lot of Thomas Edison's kids, they were considered pests in the lab when they showed up. Tom and especially Thomas Edison was not happy that his children were coming into the lab while they were working, and they would get punished for it. When he was quite young, there was one particular moment where Thomas, his son Tom Jr., basically ran into the lab to watch his dad work, and Tom had his mother, his wife, Tom's mother, Mary, go and get a switch and punish him in the yard for running into the lab. So maybe not the best conditions, and he wasn't too happy with that. Now, ultimately, following the invention of the phonograph, 1877, that's really when Thomas Edison started to make waves in the whole world. That's when people started to call him the Wizard of Menlo Park. He starts working on electric power and lighting, as many of you might know. If that doesn't, spark a light bulb for you. This would lead to a lot of time in New York. This is Fifth Avenue. Uh, it's the office of the Edison Electric Light Co. Thomas Edison's actually down in that photo with his arm kind of against the railing there on the left. This photo was taken 1881. So Thomas Edison, he's starting to make waves in the electric world. They're going to New York. He's spending a lot of time in New York, as well as his family would join him over there. Um, and essentially, the open countryside of Menlo Park was gone. The sunshine, the fresh air, being able to run around and have fun. Mary Stillwell's sister and her parents were far away. Mary was really getting into this role of being Thomas Edison, a very wealthy businessman's wife. So she is trying, she's spending time in New York, shopping, getting fancy clothes, hanging out with the elite. And so Tom Jr., here's a young picture of Tom Jr., and his siblings would actually have a governess to watch over them when they went out, which would become relatively common for the rest of his childhood. They also had a nanny to help watch over the young William, the younger son. And during their time in New York, so before this, Thomas Edison, a little bit about him. He did not go really to school as a child. He briefly went to school. He got kicked out of school. Uh, and so his mother taught him how to read and write. But basically, ever since he was a young child, he was on his own. He actually got taught how to work the telegraph in East Michigan, and that's really what got him going on his journey. And so when Thomas Edison had kids with Mary Stillwell, a local girl who also didn't really have education, he didn't really bother about, caring about their education and their training. And so his kids didn't really have much education. And only when they moved to New York would Tom and his older sister Marion attend Mademoiselle Camille de Janon's English and French School for Young Ladies and Children. So they had a little bit of education there. Now, unfortunately, the city life would start to take its toll on Mary. Mary Stillwell was in poor health. She was prone to headaches and other pain. Um, and ultimately, they would head back to the countryside. Menlo Park by now had basically been emptied out. There were no staff working there. They were all in New York or at the Edison Machine Works. And so it was just an empty house in the countryside. Mary and her children would head back there. At least her family lives nearby. Tom Jr. is always talked about having very poor health as well. And so ultimately, he was prone to fainting spells and headaches. And so they wanted some sunshine and fresh air. Now, we don't entirely know what kind of pain Mary was officially suffering from, but she had a lot of pain, and officially, she would start taking morphine. She was prescribed morphine. And back then, they didn't really have serving sizes of morphine, and she ended up taking a lot of it. And unfortunately, the fall that same year, August 9th, 1884, Mary Stillwell would pass away. The official death was labeled congestion of the brain, so like pressure and pain in the brain. Again, we don't know. Many scholars believe it might have been the morphine, but who's to say? Um, she was 28 years old. It was a month away from her 29th birthday. And so she passes away. According to Marion, Thomas Edison Sr., he took this pretty heavy, and he would actually tell Marion the news, and he could barely get through it as he was shaking with grief and weeping and sobbing. Tom Jr. was 8 years old when he lost his mother. Now, ultimately, following the passing of his wife, Thomas Edison, he kind of really dove into work. Um, I work at, of course, the Edison and Ford Winter Estates. It's around this same time period. Thomas would also eventually take a trip down to Florida, eventually traveling down to Southwest Florida, where he would buy a little piece of land, where I currently work. But that's a whole nother story, and you can find out more here at the Edison and Ford Winter Estates. Tom Jr. and his younger brother William here on the left. So the far left is William, and then Tom is right next to him. They were basically left in the care of Mary's parents. So here's Margaret on the right, their maternal grandmother. Um, Whereas 12-year-old Marion would pretty much really help her dad kind of fill up this kind of loneliness. And so when he would travel, he would take his daughter. She was his traveling friend and companion. And then he would even let her into the laboratory. She'd go to board meetings. She'd run around. And so, there was a good small chunk of time where Tom and his daughter, they grieved by spending time together. But the other two boys were kind of left out. Now, Mom 2, Electric Boogaloo. This is Mina Miller. So a little more than a year after Thomas Edison's first wife passes away, Thomas is introduced to young Mina in Boston. And Mina was the daughter of another inventor, a man named Lewis Miller from Akron, Ohio. Unlike Thomas Edison's first wife, Mina was educated. She went to Akron High School. She later went to a finishing school for young women in Boston. And so she was educated. Her father was an inventor. She was used to this life of an inventor and a businessman. Uh, she was a little bit more, I guess, proper, you could say, in comparison to maybe Tom's first wife. But they would meet. Tom would be smitten. They would fall in love, and they would get married February 24th, which is, as of recording this yesterday, was their anniversary. So happy anniversary. But they got married in 1886. Thomas Edison Jr. was 10 years old. Now, ultimately, Mina marries, possibly at the time what was considered America's greatest inventor. At least many people would have said that. But when she marries him, she is not too happy to discover that his kids were not really that educated or smart. They didn't spend time, working and studying. Here's a picture right here. That's Thomas Edison in the middle. This is relatively shortly after what would have been when they got together. So here's Tom. There's Mina with her arm, her hand sticking on his arm there. Thomas Edison is going to be about 38 years old when he marries Mina, who would be about 20 years old. All right. Now, Tom just dives right in. Tom Senior, Thomas Edison. See, same name. Edison would really jump in, dive into his new marriage. He would purchase and give to his wife as a wedding gift a 29 room mansion called Glenmont in West Orange, New Jersey. It's still up there today. If you guys ever get the chance, make sure it's open. But you can go check it out. It's a huge, big building. They had a lot of staff, and so he buys this. He gives it to his wife for their wedding, and they move to West Orange. And so officially, they leave Menlo Park. Not too long after, they would build a new laboratory nearby. Thomas would. It was a multi-level, big brick building, nothing compared to his little inventing workshop that was down in Menlo Park. Now, ultimately, re-education. That's what I have here. Mina, she wasn't satisfied with her stepchildren's education. It took her honestly by surprise and shock, and so she did the best thing that she could, which was send them to school. However, the best schools back in the day were boarding schools. And so you got to kind of think of that this Tom Jr. and his brother William and even Marion, who was not happy. She was 14 when her father married a 20-year-old, and she never really was happy with that. But ultimately, they were sent to boarding schools. So they lost their mother. Their father met a new woman, remarried her the following year and a half later, and then they basically got kicked out. And it definitely was quite detrimental on their development. 1886, Tom would attend the Dearborn Morgan School in West Orange, and then in 1889, he was boarded at St. Paul's Preparatory School in Concord, New Hampshire. So that's a hop and a skip away from West Orange, New Jersey. He was boarded there. I think I have a picture. This is a picture of inside St. Paul. Still exists today. It's a college now today. Nothing to write home about. He wrote home a lot though, but he was miserable. Most of the letters he wrote home were him feeling homesick, feeling like he didn't belong, trying to convince his parents that, hey, I'm doing really good in school. Can I come back? Like I've done it. I've done my work. He would even write for his brother William as well, talking about both of them are miserable. Um, and he would start to gain a relationship through his stepmother, but at the end of the day, a lot of what they talked about was just how awful Tom was feeling, and if his mother could bring him home, and she would not. Now, through all of this, Thomas Edison has three more children, and it's kind of this weird dynamic where with his first wife, he had a daughter and two sons. He marries Mina. He has a daughter and two sons. Um, and it's awful to say, but it was almost like, oh, Thomas Edison can do this again, but maybe he can be better with this set of children. And if you look at how they were raised and nurtured, everything was very different. Because by this point in time, Thomas Edison wasn't, the mad scientist working in his lab. He was a business owner who owned multiple businesses. He had managers in charge of those businesses, and so he actually was able to spend more time with his wife and with this set of kids versus when he was younger and was diving deep into research. Don't get me wrong, his first love was always work, but he definitely spent more time with these children. And so they had three kids. They had a daughter, Madeline Edison, born May of 1888, Charles Edison, born August 3rd, 1890, and Theodore Edison, born July 10th, 1898, Thomas Edison's youngest son. And so here they are in this photo, Mina and her three children. Now, I would definitely say that this also would really affect Tom Jr. So remember earlier I mentioned how uh he kept he would get punished if he went into the laboratory to see his father work. Well, this is a picture of Thomas Edison and his son Charles Edison working together when his son was a kid, working on projects together. He really took Charles in to be his heir apparent, and he started to teach him and train him, And so Charles got the treatment that Thomas Edison never got and always, Thomas Edison Jr. never got and always wanted. This is a quote that Thomas Edison Sr. told a friend about his son, Tom Jr. I never could get him to go to school or work in the laboratory. He is therefore absolutely illiterate scientifically and otherwise. Nice thing for your father to say about you, huh? But the second set of kids, hey, they're doing great. And so, all in all, this would uh Tom Jr. would gradually feel like he was being sent further and further away from his parents, that he was kind of being replaced. And, for a while there, he was holding on to the idea, this primogenitor idea that, he is the firstborn son, so he's going to get everything. But then as he sees how his father is working with his other kids, that idea slowly started to gnaw at him as well. Uh, the children yearn for the mines. So in 1893, 17-year-old Tom Jr., unhappy with his schooling, would leave St. Paul's without a degree. So he never graduated. He never got his high school degree. And he would basically beg his dad for a job to work. His father, they talk about nepotism. This is the opposite of nepotism. It's when you have a kid and you don't give them a good position. He didn't work with his father or in a laboratory or even at one of the more cushier, finer jobs. He worked in a mine in Ogden, New Jersey for the Edison Iron Ore Milling Company, which I promise you was not a nice time. It was not a lovely place. Tom Jr. seemed to be somewhat satisfied that he at least had a job and he was working, no longer at school. But he continued to grow very insecure, and lonely, as well as intimidated by his own father to the point where it was hard for him to talk to his father. He was always nervous that he wasn't going to amount to what his father maybe expected of him, or he's kind of recognized at this point that my dad expects nothing out of me now. It's so low on the totem pole, that it just kind of made him feel bad. The mine itself would actually shut down 2 years later, so not too long working. But uh, here we got Big Tom, Small Tom. So Tom would begin to start to make it out on his own, but he always felt like he said, he was failing his father and that he was intimidated by him. In 1897, this is a letter to his stepmom, Mina. He's 21 years old. Tom Jr. says, I probably never will be able to please him, as I'm afraid it's not in me, but I shall never give up trying. If I could only talk to him the way I want to, perhaps everything may be different. I have many ideas of my own, which sometimes, yes, I may say on all occasions, I would like to ask him or tell him about, but they never leave my mouth and are soon forgotten. Perhaps where they belong, perhaps not. This I would like to have him decide. And so he wants to talk to his dad. He wants to show his dad he's more than a mess up. But he can't. He can't open his mouth. Thomas Edison Jr., in all of my research, he appears to be, he was a weak and sickly child, and he would end up getting very timid, a lot of pressure put on him, whereas his younger brother William basically went a different route, which is that he would get angry. His brother William was angry. He was rough. He wasn't afraid to fight and call names. And he was kind of more of a bruiser. And so he took that insecurity and pushed it out, whereas he took the insecurity, held it in. Alrighty, 1898, around 22 years old. Tom, basically, this is when he starts to realize, now no longer working in the mines, that he is Thomas Edison Jr. He's Thomas Edison's son, and people are kind of amazed by that. They're like, oh, you're the inventor's son, and they start to ask him questions, and a lot of this really does start to inflate his ego. And so when he was in the spotlight talking to reporters and other people, these people would just believe every word he said. They'd be like, you're Thomas Edison's son, which means you must be an inventor. And he'd go, yeah, I guess I am. It's all in me. It's in my blood. And so, more than one time, a reporter would take his words entirely as truth and publish them, like in the New York Herald or other similar newspapers. And when he said they're working on something, they would fill out a whole piece about it, including one example where Thomas Jr. said he was working on an incandescent bulb that was even better than his father's. That's not true. As well as a way to photograph thoughts. That's what this little article is. Photographing thought. This idea that uh, any object, when fixedly gazed at for a minute by a single eye, other than being closed, the other being closed, became photographed upon the retina of the open eye and could be plainly be seen. It's not true. But basically, he tried to talk about this whole thing. There's a little image down here of this idea of this photograph thought based on what he explained. But all of this was none. Uh, we got Madison Cubicle Garden. It's a little play on words. It's a little stretch, but Madison Square Garden, squares and cubes and cubicles are little offices. So his name would bring him opportunities, including attending the electrical exhibition at Madison Square Garden in 1898. But he did not attend as an inventor, but as head of a decorating committee. So he was basically invited in because his name's Thomas Edison Jr., and they couldn't get Thomas Edison and they couldn't get some other people. But then when he was there, he wasn't in charge of an exhibit. He wasn't in charge of any kind of invention. He was in charge of helping decorate. There was an exhibit in his at his office that he was using there that used fireworks. It would explode at his desk, which caused quite a stir. When interviewed about it, he again used this to stoke his ego as an inventor, saying that, he lived life dangerously. I never expect to die a natural death, he told reporters. I feel confident I will be blown up someday. And so this is accident in the garden desk of Thomas Edison Jr., partly demolished by a singular explosion of a bomb. But otherwise, during the actual exhibition, he just kind of sat there. Uh, no, not particularly showing off anything super crazy. Now during this time, other investors, people that wanted money, they would find Tom Jr. and they would hatch some nice, plots, such as paying him for the right to use his name, uh, which happened to be Thomas Edison Jr. One of the first options is the Edison Jr. Steel and Iron Processing Company would form, with Tom receiving 1/3 of the company's stock. His father, Thomas Edison Sr., would find out about this and would get understandably embarrassed and angry with his son, and he would end up breaking off communication with him. William, the younger brother, would end up being used as a speaker to deliver the news of his father's anger. And no matter what, whenever Thomas Edison Jr. tried to do something, if he ended up getting his father's wrath, more often than not, that would end up causing him to waver and back down. Uh, Not too long after, this is a great picture. This is the background on me. This is a share for the Thomas A. Edison Jr. and William Holzer Steel and Iron Process Company. So William Holzer, that is his uncle. That man married his maternal aunt, Alice Stilwell. And so basically, William Holzer, former glassblower for Thomas Edison, was like, hey, actually, why don't we go through with this and make this company? Thomas Edison Sr. also was not happy with this. When the first company fell through, his uncle, right here, like I said, they created the second company. This also failed. Both would end up costing Tom Jr. money and fees. And then there were moments where people actually invested in these companies, not realizing basically that they weren't really anything. And then that led to court cases where they ended up even owing more money. And this just all ended up blowing entirely up into Thomas Jr.'s face. Son of a king, try son of a wizard. On the left here, we have an illustration of Thomas Edison dressed as the Wizard of Menlo Park. That's after inventing the phonograph. So Tom Jr. would actually, during all this, write to his father. He claimed that the name Thomas Edison Jr. was nothing but a detriment to his career. as no bank believed Tom Jr., who was severely in debt at this time, didn't have money. They didn't believe him when he said that he needed credit. They're like, "You're Thomas Edison's son. What do you mean you need credit? You're just messing with us, or you are not actually his son. You're just using that name to get credit." Um, and he would even go as far as jabbing his father by saying, "You should have been, ask anybody, a millionaire 10 times over if you knew how to handle your own achievements." Which is fair. Thomas Edison Sr., throughout all of this time, his money fluctuated gradually. That iron ore milling company, he lost a lot of money on that when that went under. A lot of different things happened. And so his money was fluctuating. He was never as wealthy as maybe some people think. He always had to rely on wealthy people like the Vanderbilts and JP Morgan to invest in his stuff. And a really good quote by Tom Jr. He would say, "If my name was Smith, I would be a rich man today." Basically saying that he's held down by the burden of his name, and that if he had a different name, if he had a different name, sorry, looking through my whole presentation, why don't we? That maybe he'd be a lot more successful. Dancing through life. So here, throughout all of this tumultuous time, Tom would find a wife. He would marry Marie Louise Toohey. She was a dancer. She was a chorus girl for on stage and a dancer. They married in 1899, not too long after William, Tom's younger brother, would marry his wife Blanche. Neither women were really accepted as by the boys' parents. They basically people thought of Marie Louise Toohey as a floozy. They thought that these people were taking advantage of the names, and they referred to them as it was like fast girls, like they were trying to rush into things to get money and whatnot. Um, Tom Jr. would really take up drinking through all of this time as a crutch, and now he married someone that his family referred to as a showgirl. This would really lead to a lot of embarrassment for his father and stepmother. Mina Edison was a staunch Methodist. She did not drink at all. She didn't allow any alcohol on her property, and her stepson Thomas Edison Jr. is known to be a drunk at this time and heavily drinking. And again, she's basically watching her husband's kids marry off basically their name. Marie's former husband, so she was married previously, claimed her as a gold digger. Family claimed her as a gold digger, that she just wanted money. However, Tom Jr. didn't have gold. He actually was incredibly in debt. They were regularly piling up, and he was actually on the run many times from debtors coming to come and collect that money. And so he was on the run. Throughout all of this, any letters sent from the boys, either brother did not go to Thomas Edison. It went to Jonathan Randolph, Edison's secretary, who then would relay that information, and then vice versa. He was the telephone for the two gentlemen. This is 1901. Ewald Staupner, which was the caregiver here on this property down here, the Edison Ford Winter Estate. Thomas Edison caught news that his two sons were actually traveling down to Southwest Florida at that time, and he wrote this. He said, "Dear sir, my sons and a party are on their way south. Should they come to Fort Myers and desire to occupy the house, do not allow them to do so any circumstances. You need not mention that I have given you this order, but just say that you cannot permit them or any party to occupy the house without a written order from me personally. Yours truly, Thomas Edison." So basically, he's telling the caregiver, "Don't let my son and my two sons and their friends into the Winter Estate if they come down there." I feel like not mention that I've given this order. I feel like that's Thomas Edison moving the blame from him onto his caregiver. And it probably would have been easier to just say it directly, but nonetheless. Heavy is the head that wears the name. By the end of the 1890s, Edison's name became more important than the actual products that they would be attached to. Throughout all of this, I mean, the War of the Currents was in the 1880s and early 90s. Thomas Edison famously basically lost the War of the Currents, but a lot of these, while they would be detrimental to Thomas Edison's finances, his name carried its own weight in gold. And if a product was stamped with the name Edison, that meant it was quality, and he became a household name. He, as I like to tell people down here, he was, when you think of Kleenex, you think of, I guess, tissues, you think of Kleenex. Back then, if you thought of, light bulbs, music, phonographs, other similar things, batteries, you thought Edison. Here we have the Edison New Standard Phonograph. That was his most popular model. And then over here we have even after Edison, General Electric became just General Electric. It went public. They were selling the Edison Mazda lamps. And so even though he wasn't in charge of that company anymore, it still was named after him because they knew how powerful that name was. And people started to take advantage of this, kind of like we talked about a little bit earlier. This uh, is a can of metal polish from the Edison Chemical Company in Boston, Massachusetts. Uh, the chemical company in Boston, they named themselves Edison to try to trick people into getting people to buy their product. Because the Edison name was just all over the East Coast. So they jumped on that. They hired a man named C.M. Edison, no relation to Thomas Edison, solely for the right to use his name. They bought the right to use his name. They named themselves Edison Chemical Company. Um, Thomas Edison was very quick once he heard this to take them to court and basically get them to cease and desist. Um, the courts backed Thomas Edison on this matter. Too bad for this chemical company that there wasn't another Edison they could use. Or was there? Thomas Edison Jr. So this company found Thomas Edison Jr. And they talked to him with their silver tongues, and they were able to get him to sell them his name by hiring him on and giving him the position of vice president in the company. They also let him invent as he saw fit. And so this was officially, they became the Thomas A. Edison Jr. Chemical Company. So not only did they do that, you'll see this. This is the Wizard ink tablet manufactured by the Thomas A. Edison Jr. Chemical Company. Um, and ultimately, the fact that he's using the name Wizard, which was basically his father's trademark at the time. He was the Wizard of Menlo Park, and so when people again see this, they're like, "Oh, Thomas Edison, Wizard, perfect." Um, this again, taking the Wizard name, Edison Jr. Wizard pen. What shall I give him, her, them for Christmas? Obviously, the solid gold fountain pen and a pint of Mr. Edison's tablet ink for $1. Anyways, so they're using this. Now, pens are one thing. The Magno-Electric Vitalizer is another. You might have heard about this one. I say snake oil. Nah, it's not oil, it's electric. So this was a product that was made by Thomas A. Edison Jr. through the chemical company. And it was basically a cure-all. To relieve suffering is a noble achievement. To prevent it is a mighty triumph. Thomas A. Edison Jr. And so 1903, they made these vitalizers, and they had little battery packs that you had to put on yourself, and you basically sent electricity through you, a small amount, and it was able to cure rheumatism, other things, nervous tics, basically anything. I have another great picture. So this is a picture of the gentleman wearing the Magno Electric Vitalizer, and then next to them, those are those battery packs. Um, and then they said that if the battery dies, you can mail those in to the Thomas A. Edison Jr. Chemical Company, and they would refill the electricity for them. This right here is a poster for the Edison Jr. a Magno Electric Vitalizer. So here we have Thomas Edison Jr. looking very, Greco-Roman, heroic, and he's standing on this old man who has weird Medusa snake hair on the bottom, but then has long gray strands of hair on the top. And let's be honest, does that not kind of look like Thomas Edison Sr.? The eyebrows, the nose, the face. I think this kind of looks reminiscent, and I think it's very much telling this is him kind of stepping like over, the old back. We're onto a new future. Anyways, it could just be playing on that one. Thomas Edison Sr. grew incredibly upset over this, understandably, honestly. And ultimately, Tom Jr. He would start contacting him. Edison would be very mad with his son. He'd yell at him. He'd threaten him. He'd threaten to take money away from him. He'd threaten to sue him. And Tom Jr. Would put his tail between his legs. He would cower. He would beg for forgiveness. December 1902, he wrote to his dad, offering to give up all future rights to the name of Edison for the purpose of obtaining money. And Thomas Edison and his lawyer were pretty soon able to put the Edison Jr. Chemical Company to rest. They were able to get it out. He even told the court that his son was not an inventor and was incapable of making any invention or discovery of merit. So not only, was he able to knock the company down, he knocked his son down a few more pegs. And people that bought the electromagnet magnovitalizer, they would attempt to send the batteries in to get recharged, but they didn't realize it was a different company. So they were sending it to Thomas Edison himself, and it became such a problem. Tom would just send letters back saying like, "Oh, I don't know what this is, so I don't know how to recharge it. I'm sorry." But eventually, the post office just stopped mailing things because the company no longer exists. They stopped sending these. And then we have another example briefly. This is Charles F. Stillwell. So the name Stillwell, this is Thomas Edison Jr.'s uncle. This is Mary's brother. Um, his brother, I mean, her brother, Mary's brother, Charles, he relatively close to the family. Not super close, but shortly after this, Tom was briefly in cahoots with his maternal uncle Charles, and he ended up selling him the right of his name because Charles wanted to create the Thomas A. Edison Jr. Phonograph Company, um, which is a dumb idea because Thomas Edison already had the Edison Phonograph Company. And so he's deliberately stepping on his father's toes. Edison would even say to his secretary, he'd say, Tom is either crazy or a very bad character. Charles here, ultimately he uh he was actually going blind, and so Thomas Edison, he had a lot of pity. He had anger at his son, but pity for Charles Edison, I mean for Charles Stillwell, because he was going blind and he had never really done anything like this before. And if anything, he kind of recognized that, this is an attempt for Charles to try to solidify income for someone that can't see anymore. But ultimately, he talked to both of them and he was able to stop that from happening. This is something that Thomas Edison Jr. wrote to his father. It was initially a letter it was very angry and heated, but as the letter went on, it gradually, Tom Jr. kind of realized probably, or he just slowly sank into his old cowering ways. He said, maybe I won't read through all this, but since I left you some 6 years ago, my career was undoubtedly been a wild one, as everyone knows, but I am not at all sorry that I had the experience. Although I am sorry I have injured you in the manner I have. So this is Tom Jr. talking to his dad. Um, However, that is done now, and I will talk to you as a man to man, realizing that our hatred towards each other is very intense. I can honestly say that I never had even the slightest intention of doing you any injury, but your persistent refusal to take me back with you, I will admit, has often caused me to give you little consideration in matters where I was personally benefited. I know of no business deal that I have ever made that I was not taken advantage of, having often been forced to enter in agreements to save myself from absolute poverty. I never dared to ask your advice nor to consult you upon any matter whatsoever, for from the very first you gave me sufficient cause to consider you as my worst enemy, and I still consider you today as such. And you couldn't if you wanted to, for I have injured myself too much to have anyone else do it. My object in writing you is to ascertain whether you are interested at all in their recovery. They are, of course, the only means that by I derive a living at present. So basically, he's like, I never even got the opportunity to make deals with you, Dad, and talk to you about this stuff. So it's like I suffered, and then I only continue to get taken advantage of. And basically, he come off really angry, but eventually he says, I will sign any reasonable agreement with you in which you can dictate your own terms, which will satisfy forever an agreement which will deprive me of all future rights to the name of Edison. Edison had his legal department make up contracts, which gave Tom $1,890 and Charles Stillwell $1,350 per year in exchange for vows not to leach again using the Edison name. Life of a showgirl. So, Tom wasn't the only one having financial troubles, family troubles, and drinking troubles. He wasn't only having those, he also had his fair share of marital troubles. This is again Marie Toohey here, allegedly. William told his father, so the younger brother told Thomas Edison Sr. that Tom's wife had deserted him and was taking advantage of the Edison name. He said that Marie Edison was seen going into the Haymarket, one of New York's worst joints, with two strange men and a bad woman. She was making the rounds of the Tenderloin district and boasting to everyone that she was Edison's daughter-in-law and his favorite. She seems to think she is playing all of us for suckers. When seen and followed, she was drunk and telling everything to these dirty people. Marie also robbed and left Tom Jr. When they were on vacation. She took his money and his clothes, and she returned to New York with a different man, where she would resume her life on the theater stage, where Tom attempted to chase after her, didn't have money for the train. Eventually, he would end up disappearing into his own vices. Edison, William, and the Pinkerton Agency would eventually hunt him down to find him. And under William's request, Thomas Edison Sr. arranged in secret to pay Marie $25 to keep her mouth shut a week, $25 a week, which is a lot of money back then, to stop identifying as an Edison. It's not a super amount of money, but it's a good amount of money. So basically, he's weekly stipends to say, hey, stop saying you're my daughter-in-law. E.A. Thomas. Tom's health would only worsen, and he would actually check himself into a sanitarium briefly, possibly for alcoholism. Later, he would undergo treatment at St. James Hospital in Newark, possibly again for alcoholism. This is a picture of St. James Church and Hospital. And eventually, Tom Sr. would hear that Tom checked into the Valley House Hotel in Greenwood Lake, New York, under the pseudonym E.A. Thomas. He was attempting to escape debtors and loan sharks that he had owed money to. But this is where he finds something of a fresh start. During his time there, his health was poor and he drank a lot, but he found something, a woman, Beatrice Willard, also known as Matilda Hazer, and Beatrice Lamontag Hazer, Miss Beatrice Matilda Hazer, and even Mrs. Thomas Montgomery, allegedly a first husband she had. Tom would tell his father that a Miss Willard was nursing him back to health. And ultimately, Thomas Edison fell in love with this young woman. She had odd origins. We don't know a lot of things. Her age is also iffy based on different times. She was a number of different ages at the same time, late teens, 20s, 30s. It could be anything. But Thomas Edison fell for her. And he really wanted to marry her. However, the old ball and chain, which I don't likely take to referring to spouses as balls and chains, but he was still married to Marie Toohey, and he wanted to get a divorce, but Marie Toohey wasn't not keen on that because she was getting paid weekly, and if they got a divorce, she probably would lose her $25 check every week. This would lead Thomas Edison Jr. and Beatrice would move in together on Staten Island, not as Edisons, but as Burton and Beatrice Willard. The Ballad of Burton Willard. So Thomas Edison would just begin going as a completely different name, not only to escape from debtors, also because he had basically told his father that if he kept doing business as Edison, like he would stop doing that. And also, this is a way that he could live with Beatrice, hopefully in secret. Now, during his time as Burton Willard, Tom Jr. would write to his father about his new dream. With my new name, my new life, and new acquaintances, I am ready to start out in the world fully equipped to meet the demands of my business ability. This, father, means that I must have an occupation. I have long been an enthusiast in the interest of agriculture. And I find that my greatest ambition and heart's desire is to possess a farm and start a mushroom business. My favorite quote right here. I am positively proficient in everything concerning the mushroom. Sounds like a fun guy, huh? I apologize, but I love puns. So, he wants to start a mushroom business. He actually said, "Hey, if you buy me a farm, then I can give you 6% of what I make regularly, and we can pay it off." His dad was like, "No, I'm not going to just buy you a farm. You don't know anything about this." He's like, "Tell you what, I'm going to rent you a farm, and if you start to really hit it off as a farmer, then maybe we'll buy you a farm." Because through all of this, I will say, Thomas Edison, he even though he threatened to sue his son, he did a lot of bad things. He did still, when his kids really seemed to convince him that they were trying to do something new, he would give them money. He would try and help them out. If anything, this gets Tom Jr. out of the press, lets him do his own thing. So Burton Willard and his wife would attempt to start farming. Now, Tom wasn't a good farmer. He didn't actually, he knew some things about farming mushrooms, but not really. He did not have the equipment. He didn't have the skills. He didn't have, honestly, the physical health to. He was a recovering alcoholic who was still regularly struggling. He was consistently a weak and sickly child, and that continued into his adulthood. And he didn't really have the muscle to, farm an entire land. And pretty soon he messages his father saying, "Actually, I want to do different things. Maybe I could work at your new cement company. Heard that's going pretty well. Or I kind of want to be a photographer." Uh, Thomas Edison's lawyer, Frank Dyer, this gentleman right here, was now the liaison between father and son. Edison would tell Frank Dyer that his son Tom was no good and a degenerate. Dyer later wrote in his diary, "It seems remarkable that Edison should be so cold and vindictive to his own son." So basically, even Frank Dyer's like, "Man, Thomas is a pretty rough on his kids." But Edison was not happy that Tom basically gave up farming so quickly. Now, Frank Dyer here had some good news. Around the same time, Marie Toohey, the first wife, would suddenly pass away at the age of 26, so relatively young through all of this, February 17th, 1906. And so that gave Tom Jr. the opportunity to officially marry Beatrice Hazer Willard. And so officially, they get married. Thomas A. Edison Jr. and Beatrice Hazer. Um, for the few years there, Tom Jr. did refer to himself as Burton Willard or Mr. and Mrs. Willard or even Tom Willard when he was writing letters to people and things. But kind of officially, as of 1906, he can start going back by Edison again. And they married the 9th of July. Um, However, there was no Edison the third. So this is a lovely photo of down here in Florida. This is the porches of the Edison Winter Estate. This is Madeline Edison, her husband John Sloan, and their child, one of their kids. So Thomas Edison's only child that ever gave him grandchildren was Madeline. She had four children with her husband John Sloan. These are the only Edison grandkids. They don't have the name Edison. They have the last name Sloan, but the first one was named Thomas Edison Sloan. 1916 is when this news would happen. Throughout all of this, Madeline was writing to her mother Mina and Tom that she was pregnant. Stuff was happening. At the same time, Beatrice was writing to Mina Edison that she was pregnant, and this made Mina Edison get quite scared. Um, I don't know why, maybe insecurity, but she didn't really want grandkids from Tom Jr. She wanted them from her own children. Um, but ultimately, not they would not end up having a child. I we don't I don't know all of the research. I don't know if they were just hoping for it. But I will say there were letters by Beatrice at the end of her life writing to Mina. She had a very close relationship with Mina that she might have had a miscarriage. And she regularly um, talked about her baby. She would write that, like, "I'm here with my baby." But she said that for like 2 decades. She referred to having a baby and being here with it, and she was very religious toward the end of her life, especially uh, Beatrice would outlive her husband Tom, and there were moments where she'd be like talking about, God, heaven, and her baby. And so I am kind of firmly believe that maybe there's a chance that she possibly did miscarry. Um, I did see you raised your hand there. I will wait to the end for questions, but I'm curious if you were going to ask about that same thing. Now, ultimately, the other kids of Thomas Edison didn't have children for a very reasons. Obviously, Tom and Beatrice didn't have kids. William didn't have a kid. Marion, the first daughter, she married a German officer before World War One, was stuck over there for the entirety of World War One in Germany, divorced him, came back, never remarried. And then the last two kids, Charles and Theodore, they were part of like zero population growth initiative or whatever the name was for that, where there was a scare of overpopulation and they didn't want to have kids. And they said, I guess our sister having kids is good enough. And there are still Edison descendants from the Sloans. So ultimately, this would lead to a good kind of quiet, is what I say. There's Thomas Edison Jr., older. The rest of Tom Jr.'s life would remain relatively quiet. There was no more major headlines. There was no more large embarrassments, no more selling his name to other people. And his relationships with his siblings were never bad. He always relatively had good, decent relationships, especially with his own siblings, but his step siblings. Charles Edison. Um, from in all my research, he seemed to appear to be a pretty kind guy who's always willing to kind of talk to his brother and give him a chance. And his relationship, even with his parents, would mellow out. This right here is a lovely photo from Thomas Edison's 73rd birthday. Attending this birthday is Thomas Edison, Mina Edison, Charles Edison, Charles's wife, Carolyn. They got married here on the property in Fort Myers, and right there, Tom Jr. So he's got the two firstborn sons from each of his wives attending his birthday. Um, and so like I said, the relationship increased as time went on. Um, Charles, this is a great photo too. I just cropped it so we have the two of them on either side. Charles on the left, Tom on the right. His younger brother Charles, who was the true heir apparent, who would later take over as runner of almost all the Edison companies. He would help Tom get a job at the laboratory, actually, a menial job, but a job nonetheless. And even following Thomas Edison's death in 1931, Charles would help Tom get better positions. Thomas Edison left his son Charles multiple companies during this time, and his son Tom Jr. would actually get put on the board of directors for some of them. Charles was able to put Tom Jr. on them for some of the companies, which is pretty nice. He's a pretty caring younger brother. However, not this would not last too long for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of these companies would go bankrupt, unfortunately, or would dissolve or get consolidated during the Great Depression. And two, oh, here's a nice photo too of that same birthday. Take it all in. But two, uh, Thomas Edison Jr. would pass away not too long after. He followed his father to the grave 4 years after Thomas Edison Sr. passed away, which was in 1931, October 18th. Tom Jr. would pass away. It was August 25th, 1935. Thomas Edison Sr. lived a very long life. He lived to be 84 years old, which in the 1930s was just relatively considered incredibly long life. And so his son dying at 59 years old is not unheard of, but his health was still very poor. In fact, his brother William also would pass away shortly thereafter, also in the 1930s, 1937. So both Edison sons from Mary passes away within a decade of their father. Marion lived a relatively longer life, and then the other Edison children also lived very long. In fact, Theodore Edison lived until I believe it was 1992, which is crazy. He lived until he was 90, I think 94 years old. Yeah, 1904, because he was born 1898 and he died in 1992. So lived very, very long life. But anyways, Tom Jr. possibly died of a heart attack. He was actually on a trip heading back to Charles Edison's estate when he stayed at a hotel with some friends, and unfortunately, he would pass away in that hotel. Um, Pulmonary thrombosis is what it said. Possibly it was instant. We don't know the details. He did remain relatively unhealthy with his drinking habits until the very end of his life, but we don't know. But ultimately, I mean, the next slide is my bibliography, which we can look at here. Edmund Morris, one of the more recent Edison biographies. Very good, very well written, very interesting. It's backwards. Randall Strauss, Wizard of Menlo Park. I went through him. And look at this. I have a step into history uh, mentioned here because my coworker and supervisor Tim Snyder gave a presentation called "The Edison Children: A House Divided" on YouTube, and he did a lot of research. And honestly, I was able to bounce off his research that he did, which I love. And so I'm like, I'll give him the credit. He also sent me some photos that I wanted for this slideshow. Some other things I have or information about the different companies and whatnot. Um, Edison Rutgers. I have a couple things here. Rutgers University has the Edison papers, digital papers of thousands of letters. Um, Unfortunately, the past few days they've actually been down, and I wasn't able to put a lot of the stuff I actually had saved on my slideshow because I just had links to Rutgers to those different articles and pages that I was going to get to. And then when I finally tried to use them, down for service. And so I probably would have had even more. This was a very long presentation. I'd have even more. Newspapers.com, a lot of fun stuff there. But let me just go back to him. Ultimately, the Ballad of Burton Willard, which he was only referred to as a short time, but it just amazes me that Thomas Edison Jr. would go by a pseudonym more than once, but a pseudonym because of everything in his life that he had built up to. And I don't only blame him. I don't blame him entirely. He made bad decisions. He was taken advantage of entirely, though. And as I like to say down here to people that when it came to Thomas Edison's first set of kids, uh, Thomas Edison didn't water the garden. He didn't take care of the garden. And then suddenly he wasn't happy with the fruit. Whereas the second garden, he watered a lot more, spent more time in that garden, talked to that fruit. And then when the trees finally blossomed, he was quite more happy with those. And so it's kind of this whole tragic tale of everything thrown onto the shoulders of being Thomas A. Edison Jr. Um, so that is my presentation. Of course, this will be uploaded to YouTube shortly, but otherwise, thank you so much and have a great day.